The Rockler router table box joint jig really does come with everything you need except for the router bit itself and the wood you're going to cut. The MDF base is covered with a slick, high-pressure laminate, and the one-piece fence slides in very precise tracks to ensure a straight cut. The jig is locked in the miter slot by a pair of expanding metal followers, and you lock those in place with a pair of these 5-star knobs from Rockler. I like these because they're a nice diameter. You can get a lot of pressure very easily. An important feature of this jig are the aluminum keys that come in 1/4 inch, 3/8, and 1/2 inch widths. These keys are very consistent in width, and that's important because we don't want any binding during the cuts. After installing a correct bit and key, we have to establish the distance between the bit and the key, and that distance should be equal to the diameter of the bit. As with any jig, this distance is important, so you want to take your time and get this right. And then snug the handles down to lock the jig in place. To control tear out on the back side of the workpiece, we need to make a sacrificial fence face. We need to start with the key removed and the face in its position against the fence. Then we want to mark on the sacrificial face where that slot is that the key goes in. We need to cut a groove to clear the key. I raise the bit a little higher than the top of the keys, and we use that bit to clear out most of this wood. This turned out to still be a little bit snug on the 1/2 inch key, so I used the brass to open up the slot just a little bit, and that worked fine. With the key back in place, I clamped the sacrificial face to the fence and ran a couple of screws through the pre-drilled holes in the fence to hold the face in place. My first job is to cut 1/2 inch box joints down the full length of this piece of wood. This wood is actually longer than any box joint I can imagine making. This is going to be a gauge that I can measure later on when I'm designing projects to make sure that I get either a full symmetrical or a non-symmetrical joint. Either way, we want a full pin at each end of the joint, and this way we can measure it and be exact. This is a simple gauge that eliminates a lot of mistakes in stock width later on. And I use that gauge to decide on the width of our test pieces here, so we're going to cut our first joint with this jig and see if we come out right. The instruction sheet that comes with this jig has very nice color photographs that show you exactly the sequence of making all these cuts. One of the nice things about a box joint jig is that the procedure remains the same all the time. You notice that the new cut doesn't just drop right down over the key because it's a very close fit, and that's exactly what we want to make an accurate joint. When we get to the end of the first piece, we use that as a spacer to make the first cut on the second piece. Then we just move the second piece over, just as we did with the first piece, and continue to make the cuts. If I measured this right, when we get done, we're going to have a nice full pin on either end. And now you get to see in real time how Rockler's jig worked and how accurate my gauge was. The fit of the joint is nice and snug, and that's the way I like a box joint. Friction's the only thing holding this joint together. You can see that it's a nice, clean, tight joint. The pins stick out just a little bit for sanding, and both ends are nice and flush. That means the jig's accurate, and my gauge was accurate. So if you'd like to be using box joints in your woodworking, or making cleaner box joints, look at the Rockler router table box joint jig. This jig is nicely made and very easy to use.